Introducing the beauty bag. This is a great project. I've really enjoyed actually creating this. So it's I'd say a vanity bag or a beauty bag. Now that has some pockets in the front. It's got a full top zip opening, and I've stiffened it with some bag stiffener, or you could use foam. It's got a piece that goes over the zip at the back so as it protects the actual zipper, and a little handle on the top. For this project you could use a number 3 or a number 5 zip because you're not going to sew across it. So it's quite a nice project. So this is what the embroidery design is. We've also given you a file which is plain, so you could use your novelty fabric that you might have in your stash for that day that you want something special to do. So let's look at cutting our lining. So we've got 3 panels that make up the actual box. And so we've got our lining front, our lining side, and then we have a longer piece of folded lining, which is the actual panel with a fold which sits an inch past the panel, and then we make a pleat into it to make 2 pockets. We'll see that in a minute. Then we've got our lid with the embroidery with a variegated thread on this particular one, and we have the floral bottom, the base file. This just needs to have we're going to make a seam through this, so we just fold this piece of fabric in half, so it's about an inch and a bit bigger or deeper than your panel. Sew the seam in from the end for a couple of inches each end, and then we split that seam open so we actually have a seam which we can pull the project through at the end. Let me just try and get that stitch to show you that that seam is going to be coming out, okay, once we've finished the project. So we're going to cut a pair of these linings. One will have a seam in it and one will not. Let's find our middle placement notches on these panels. I'm just going to cut out a double, and then match that seam up with the end notches on this. And the way we do this is actually we're just going to fold our panel. This one is the base panel. Give it a snip on the fold, both sides. And then we're going to match the snip and do the same to find the center position on each end. There we have it. Those 2 end notches should sit on that seam that we've created to pull through the project at the end. So there we have a pair of those, and a top and bottom panel. Transfer your notches. Because the body of this beauty box is made up with 3 panels and not a front and a back and 2 ends, it's just not made up with 3 panels. The joining panels are slightly offset around the curve, and I've just done this just because it's something different. But it also meant that the design that we embroider goes around the curve, which is what I wanted. For the handle, because I've got this real busy fabric, I didn't know what to do for a handle. I found a striped fabric that had all the right colours in it. So we're just going to actually make a striped handle. So we're going to fold that and then fold it again. And this piece here, these are for the back, hiding the zip. So one's internal, one's external. That's what these are for. And we're going to actually make these up now. And that piece there is going to match. That's what that piece is between our 2 pieces of lining. Just hides the zip teeth. The zip goes right to the centre back and butts up together. So let's fold this. We just want a half-inch seam on the end of the skinny lining one. Just a half-inch seam. And then we're going to finger press that seam open. Make a snip to find the centre. Turn it in through on itself, match our seam to our snip. And then just edge stitch that together so as it's actually a complete unit. We don't need it to be open, we're just going to edge stitch it, so just use the edge of your foot. It should be what I call a shy 1/4 inch, that's what my edge stitching is. Okay, so that's the cover, the zip cover for the lining on the inside of this bag. Now let's make the external cover. So it is folded in half, right sides together, and do a 1/2 inch seam either end. There's lots of ways of doing this particular technique, but I found this one here seems to be the easiest. Turn that through, poke those corners out, make them nice and sharp. Again, just edge stitch that open edge. So as it's edge on top of edge, just edge stitch it so that that piece is closed. And we'll give them a wee press, and we'll put those aside and use those later. The lining one is slightly shorter than the exterior one, just ever so slightly, by about 1/4, 3/8 of an inch. So what we do is we fold this. This has been fussy cut so as it finishes correctly. I went to great pains to actually do this to make sure that the stripes ended up on there. So fold it in half, then press it crisply, then fold it in half again. So the right side of the fabric's on the inside, so this is the wrong side you're looking at. Then what we're going to do is then we're just going to stitch it over the ends of the white stabilizer. I'm just use bag stiffener for this. You could use a couple of layers of interfacing if you wished. I've just stitched along the edge of that. This is a 1/2 inch seam, and then I'm just going to poke these through. So it's a one turn, then another turn. So turn, open that, pull that seam open, turn, pull that seam open, then we turn it through again. So all our raw seams are on the inside fold. It's all nice and neat. This is actually how we do the end of a cord tie or something like that. Now I'm using my stripes to keep everything straight. Press that, and then we're going to just top stitch that. Just push those corners out and make sure they are truly out. Right. Let's go and top stitch this. A little bit longer stitch. And then, sorry for that, the fuzziness of this. It does correct itself eventually. I don't know why it was doing this. And I'm just edge stitching with a longer stitch around the outside edge. Again, I'm using my patchwork sole, which I love. You can barely see the stitching on this there, but it is, well, in real life you can see it, but Right, I go in a little bit. Then I just do a second row of stitching on the inside. Oops, one more stitch. Thank goodness that is over. That's a really annoying, that fuzz, but it does stop. Right, so that's our, here we have it. So as we're measuring from the stitching line, we're measuring in 2 inches, 5 centimeters. I will find your, if you haven't already found your quarters, then do so, please. So the middle of that strap with the middle of that notch. So we found that it's 2 inches in from the end, and then 2.5 inches to centre, 2.5 and 2.5 to centre. You need to go across 2 or 3 or 4 times. Sorry, 3 or 4 times. A double row. Because the handle is what's holding the bag. The zip strength is what's holding the bag closed. But the handle does play a part. It's not just a novelty finish. Right, same thing here. Find the centre, 2 inches in, 2.5 and 2.5. This is a 6x10 project. So what we're wanting to do is make sure it's central, and also just have a little bit of a loop, which you'll see when this is finished. Just a little bit of a loop. Just easier to actually sink a needle, pivot and turn around. It really is. That's what we just want, that little bit of a 1 inch sort of raised area in that handle. Right, we're going to join our panels together. This fabric was such a fun fabric. We've done the same thing with our lining, and we've actually placed a pocket in there. So in the notes it tells you actually how to create that pocket. So we join this with 1/2 inch seams. We're just sort of sewing inside the perimeter of that stitching line, just so as that seam is not visible on the outside once that seam is pressed open. We're sewing our centre and our 2 sides together, our central panel and our side backs panels together. So it's 3 panels long. The same we did with our lining. Our lining does have the pockets in the front panel as opposed to on the back where the zip panel is. It's just too much to deal with as far as bulk and fiddliness. So spike your corners, get that last stitch. Find that corner and then put your pin in. And we're just going to sew both of these seams. Okay, so as it matches. I didn't fussy cut this fabric, it just happened to actually work relatively well. It only dawned on me about fussy cutting up there when I was actually doing this project, doing this particular part. I thought, I should have fussy cut this, but then it worked out perfectly, so just like the gods. But these seams do need to be pressed quite firmly. I've cut Mr.'s head off at the top there, but half of his head's going into the zip anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But no, quite a fun fabric. It's got a linen-y feel to it, so it's a little bit thicker than craft cotton, just ever so slightly. So what we're going to do is along the top edge, we're going to run one side of our continuous zip. And it's going to be inset 1/4 of an inch. Now I do this because I feel that having the whole seam allowance allows you a little bit more fabric to handle putting the zip in, because if it's all edge on edge, you are reliant on your machine skills more so than your being able to position with your fingers. So that's why I do it. If I was making it for myself or doing a batch of them, I probably would have trimmed this off and had my edge of my zip against the edge of my seam because it would have been trimmed. But I've this time run a basting or positioning seam 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and that's where we're going to pin our zip to all the way along that top edge, just one side of our continuous tape zip. And it's going to leave a little black piping on the seam. Our batting and our stabilizer is not, our batting and our stiffener is not in that seam that has been actually dropped down a little bit from that seam, so as there's no bulk with the zip, because we're going to encroach past that seam allowance just a couple of millimeters, but didn't want it to be bulky. So I'm just pinning this into place. I don't normally pin it into place, but I'll just pin this into place. We want to put a marker pin 2 inches down from the edges, because we don't want to sew that 2 inches. We're going to start 2 inches in and finish 2 inches in, because we need to actually sew that back seam up, and then we need to re-fiddle with our zip and then put our zip over our open seam. I just don't want to do that at this stage. I want you to start with putting the zip on without it being truly the length you need. I'm using a zip foot. I'm using the adjustable zip foot. This is a low shank zip foot, and you'll notice if you've been following me, it's not my normal one. I have found one which works just as well, if not better. It's slightly fatter. It's got a nice tension on it, and really enjoying found it. So there's a link on our website to the feet I use. It's just perfect because it's actually 6 mils wide, and well, it's actually 7 mils wide, truthfully, but I'm really enjoying using it. It's made a huge difference. My little Elna foot that I had from 50 years ago, well, that's when it was first invented. Not really designed for all the modern machines because it's not over the right teeth, whereas this one here is. It's sitting right on the teeth, and it's so easy to use and so quick. So give it a light press. Light press and seam. It doesn't have to be firm. We'll do that later. But where that seam does need to be pressed so as it will naturally want to fold down. Okay. Now, let's trim our zip so it's in line with that row of stitching. Okay, let's trim our zip. Okay, that's where it needs to be, trimmed to that point, and the same with the other one. I make this feel a little bit cack-handed because it feels like I'm cutting backwards. Make sure it's square off the edge. Right, so they finish at that seam at this stage. And I'm just going to take my edge off because it just gets in the way. So I've got a single, it's going to be a single piece of the zip. We're going to sew the seam together. Pull those zips out of the way. We're going to sew the seam. I purposefully haven't sewn the seam till now, so as it's nice and flat for you to put the zip in, and that's why. Some people will say, oh, why didn't you sew it in on the loop? Well, I don't want to. I want the zip to be proud and the right length, and so as that you know that you're in control of the zip. That the zip's not in control of you. Right. Let's press that seam from the front. And then, now, they are butting together tight. We need an 1/8 of an inch, like 2 to 3 millimeters apart, so they need a slight haircut. Just trim off a whisker off both. See, it's just an 1/8 of an inch, not a 1/4 of an inch. It's an 1/8 of an inch, just. Okay, just what it's, and that is so. Now trim the same appropriate amount off the other side that we've actually, which is still free, because these have to fit. Okay, so it's an 1/8 of an inch. If we have them so as they are buttered up tight, what happens is that, see, that's the same position here. We're going to have an 1/8 of an inch gap at the back, and then that piece is going to go on first, and then we put our zip on top of that. What happens if you don't have that gap is that when it comes to putting the slider on, it makes it more difficult. It just gets in the way. So all I'm going to do now, keep that seam open. That seam allowance has a tendency to want to close. Now just stitch along the zip. Okay, just that 1/8 of an inch, that's what we want. Okay, that's one side of the zip on. So that's the body complete. The seam is at the back. That front panel doesn't have a seam in it, and that's what the pockets are on. The pockets are on that side of that front panel. While you're at this, put seam on seam and clip your quarters. So there's that one there on top of the back seam, and find your quarters. See how they're offset? Right. Make sure we've got our quarters set for this. And then if you're using a one-way pattern, make sure your pattern's upside down for this, because we're stitching the base on now. Ask me how I know, because one of them I did and I had it upside down. So quarter to quarter to quarter, and then on the body seam we're going to snip around the curve, not all the way to the seam, but every centimetre or every 3/8, maybe even less, just a snip, finishing sort of like about an 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, and that will spread and it stitches perfectly. If you've followed the seams that we have suggested, this fits perfectly. Okay, it looks like it doesn't, but it actually does. It fits absolutely perfectly. I'm using pins on this project now for the only reason is that at the moment now I've got my hands are sore, and I'm just using pins now. Although when I was sewing putting the lining into this project now, I felt like a human pin cushion because these pins are ultra sharp, which are great, but I kept on getting them stuck in my hands. But so a lovely curved shape. That's the inside. That's the one, that corner, and we're going to do that the same for all the corners. And as you know by now with me, I sew a quarter at a time, so I never really worry too much about pinning everything around, a quarter at a time to make it manageable under the machine. and I'm sewing to the left hand side of that perimeter stitching line. By all means keep those pins in. It's the way I sew. I like to sew in control. I keep my fingers quite close to the foot and the work now, which is a bit concerning for some people, but it works for me. Okay, so that's my quarter on quarter seam there. Here's my scissors. Let's snip around. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Probably needs one more. Once I know that first quarter fits, or once I've done the first quarter, now I'm always very relaxed about making sure that that last that seam on the long run of the body seam. Now I know it will fit. I just do, because it has to. Here we are. So there's my quarter seam there. That will be on the front. Again, snip, snip, snip. So that's them all together. There's no sense in doing any pressing, there's no need. And when we turn that out, you'll find all those corners are rather beautiful. We've already clipped the corners. You don't have to clip the base corners, there's no need to do that. And you'll see they sit rather nicely and rather proud, which is great. So that's our body shape. For the 6x10 file, it's actually a decent size. Okay, that's our base panel for our lining. And here's our lining with our 2 pockets on the front seam. We're going to do that back seam. Now, I've taken a slightly bigger seam allowance, like 1.5 rather than half an inch. Sorry, 5/8 instead of half an inch. It just makes the lining a bit smaller and makes it sit into the project a little bit more snugly without too much extra fabric. Right, so that's we've sewn that back seam, so we now have a loop of body. There's our pockets, tuck, tuck. I've just stitched down the middle of those pockets so as it gives me 2 rather than having a long, just one single pocket. Just it's given me 2. So that's the back seam there. That's the back, that's the front, and there's my pockets in the front. We're just going to I'm just going to be clipping my corners and then go to the machine. Just putting clips on my quarters. Right, so that's going to be, there's my pockets there. Just make sure that the base is on the right end. Otherwise you'll have upside down pockets which won't be of any use to anybody. Let's go to the machine and start stitching. Natural. I just start at the back, and I've kept my zip foot on, because I want to put it or do it use it for the next part, but I just think it needs to be. You can actually get around a corner a little bit better with a zip foot. So here's my curve. So again, snip, snip, snip. So this is a. There it goes. Thought I did do that on my first mock-up. I twisted my lining. 5/8 seam. If you sew in a 5/8 seam around the base too, it fits perfectly. If you get any tucks in your lining around the seam, it doesn't matter. No one is going to be looking at the base seam of your project. And we're sewing to the left-hand side of that basting stitch. I put a basting stitch along the edge of the bottom of my lining, A, to actually tell me it was my bottom edge, and B, was something for me as a guideline for sewing this particular area. So there's my notch on notch there. So that's my centre front of my project. Right, so that's my lining. There's my hole in the bottom there to actually pull the project through when we're done. And got my pockets there. Bit of fun. Now, the lid. We have put a placement row of stitching around the outside edge. We've stitched in 1/4 inch like we did for our main body before putting our zipper on. We want to put this zip cover, the outer zip cover, we want to sit this on our seam. Now I sit it against, I like to step the bulk here, so I put it on so as it's sitting on the 1/4 inch seam line there. Centre to centre, and just stitch, machine base it into place, just so it doesn't move. Okay, so I've machine based that into place using it. Okay, so there we are. Now we want to start, so that's going to sit on top when it's there, and it's going to cover the back of the zip at the centre back, because that's the centre back seam. Okay, that's what it's going to do. That basically gets top stitched into position, or edge stitched into position. Very simple. So now we want to 1/4 our zip. We know it's the right length because we've trimmed it back to match the other side of the zip tape. So we want to actually 1/4 it. So fold it in half, then fold those 1/4s in half again. So fold those halves in half again to give you your 1/4s. And these are a guide for placement around the project. Okay. And one more. You could use your tape measure and do it the technical way. Yeah, just divide it by 4, but this folding and snipping is just as easy. Right, so let's start with centre on centre, and the zip is wrong side up. I'm pinning it to the seam, as you can see. Sorry. Don't pin it there, pin it there. That's it. So we will need to leave that little 1/8 of an inch gap, don't forget. So we need to be pinning the edge of the zip against the edge of the basting, like we did with the other, and leaving the gap to match the same as what we have on our main body at the centre back seam. And you will see why. So what I've got now is pin our ends. Again, the edge of the zip tape is in 1/4 of an inch. Then I'll just do 1/4 and show you. So it's snip, 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 snip half the value of the tape. Don't snip too close to the teeth. Half the value of the tape, and you can see it will actually spread out quite nicely. It looks like it's tight, but it won't be once we're actually stitching. It is absolutely fine. So let's start with our zip foot, and stitch this zip into position. So we have that. Because the other side of the lining is going to sit on top of that and sandwich that zip, so you're never going to see it. I start at the centre back again. This foot is so nice to actually use because it holds everything in position. That's the one thing I dislike about zip feet, is that those rocker ones that you put onto the ankle, there's so much movement in them. They're flexy and they just don't hold the fabric where you want them to be. That's why I've gone back to using an adjustable, because it's quite firm and slightly established feeling. So, of course, I didn't use the snipped one already, did I? Well, this shows you, and you want to snip around the, probably going to need to snip just one more snip around that curve. And I'm using my pointy awl. If I get my hands out of the way, which I do eventually, you can see what I'm doing. I'm just basically pushing the tape under the zip foot. And we've got notch on notch there. So that's working well. It's slightly forward of the notch because we've got the gap at the back. So again, snip, snip, snip. That's better. The more you snip, the longer the zip gets. So just be aware of that. You don't have to snip the zip tape all the way around, it's just not necessary. Just take your time. It's not a rush, it's not a race. People get so stressed about doing this putting zips in, and they shouldn't be. All it is teeth on a ribbon. See, I've got a little point there. I mean, I should have it's annoyed me because it's not there now, but I should have unpicked that little blip. Now put your other zip facing, or the internal zip cover. Let's sandwich that zip in between these two pieces, because this is the time to put this in. I did try it on the lining there, but it was too fitty to finish. So that's what we've got so far. And now we just want to put our lining onto this and bag it out and turn it through. If you found that, I'm just giving those corners a little bit of a press. You could actually edge stitch the edge of that zip tape on just stitching on the very edge of it with your zip foot if you wanted to hold that into position. Didn't feel this needed it. So here is my lining. Because we have the handle, there's a bit of bulk inside this, so it doesn't want to sit naturally flat. So just quarter pin and then put a pin in the corners, and we'll go around and stitch this in. I stitched this twice because I found that the first time wasn't as successful, it wasn't as close as I wanted it to be. Now, we only want to put a pin in 3/8 past that lining facing. So, because we want to leave an opening here at the back to turn this lid through once we've got our zip established between our lining and our outside panel. These quilt pins are lovely. They've got glass heads, but they're very, very fine and they do bend very, very easily. But I do like using them. They're ultra sharp. I'm just pinning the corners. It just gives tension on the lining for no other reason, because you'll see when I stitch it, I actually take the pin out, but way before I get there. But it just puts some tension on the lining. And one more. Right, so we're going to start with the lining side up first. Oops, no, I'm lying. We're going to start with the panel side up first so we see the line. And we're starting a centimetre over the zip cover extension little flap that we put on the back. So we're going to just stitch around here. It naturally wants to actually move away from my stitching line just ever so slightly, like it's a needle width. It naturally wants to push it away. And what I'm doing here is I'm pushing the teeth flat in because they want to curl back and sit against or in front of the foot. So I want to get it positioned first and then we can go and tidy it up by stitching from the other side, which is more visible. I'm pushing the teeth in towards the center of the lid. And we just want to stitch just a centimetre in. Yep, that's it. So let's go from the other side and make that seam a little bit more even, because it's very wobbly. It's a very wobbly looking seam when you do it from the other side. So this one just straightens it up a bit, and you can see and feel the teeth a little bit more. But it's better to do it twice than it is to do it from the side at the beginning. It just doesn't work out the same. It slips. So that's exactly where we want it to be. Now let's just trim. Let's just trim off. Don't trim along the outside edge at the back, just start from the opening. Okay, so there's the opening there. Let's just go in and trim to you're just going to catch the very edge of your zip tape, doesn't matter. It's not doing anything, it's not going anywhere. So it's a quarter of an inch, a shy quarter of an inch, just inside that perimeter stitching line actually. So thinking about this, the thing was, well, isn't that making it a little bit small? Isn't it making the lid a little bit small? No, it's not, because you've got the frame of the zip tape extending out from the stitched edge seam, wall perimeter seam. Turn this through. Didn't want to leave too much of a gap there because I don't want that lining to stretch, but give those corners a bit of a roll. So that's going to be turned under and stitched. Give that a wee bit of a press. If you've got any major puckers, you need to actually go through and just fix those up, but some minor wobbles, don't worry about it. Give that a bit of a press. This fabric, being a pseudo poly linen with a bit of a slub in it, is not as easy to work with as I had hoped, but it's actually okay. But I've got a few pointies around those curves, which I don't like. But once the project is finished, you do not see them because the zip pulls them out. So just going to give that a little press. Just thought it was sort of like the right texture for a retro sort of looking beauty box. So while you're watching me do this, I'm just putting some pins in and I'm going to hand stitch that close. For the embroidery actually on the one that's got all the flowers around the edge, I wanted the flowers are sort of like space age, so I chose 12 or 16 colours that sort of went together but didn't, and I chose 50 sort of ultra lounge in your face colours with a few accents, and nothing is supposed to match, and it's supposed to be all quite random, quite spacey, something. Yeah, I just wanted to have that feeling of the shock feeling of the embroidery, more so than a nice blended muted embroidery, and it's worked out very, very well. But do with it what you wish. I can't wait to see some of these projects because this is actually quite a fun project. The embroidery panels take a little while to stitch, about 70 minutes approximately for each of the panels, so there was a bit of work on these panels. And putting this together went together really relatively fast. I was quite surprised. Right. The good old fork. I'm afraid that I can't beat the system. Everyone says there's a better ways of doing this. I think the fork taped onto the table, that's my go-to. I really like this. And I place my zip pull so it is end out upside down, so it's the top and it's upside down, and you put that in the middle prong, and that's how you slide the first one on, and the second one goes on like so. Without having that 1/8 of an inch gap, it's too hard to see. You can't see what you're doing, so move that along. Now see there's a little step there. Just take that out, push the right side up again. See how even that is? Now I'm going to do a shock horror thing. I like having my zips closed under this tab. Okay, I like them to be closed because it makes that back flap that hides the zip. It makes it stay in position. But now I would probably go to the sewing machine and put a zigzag over this, but I'm going to show you how to do it by hand for those, because you've got to be very, very careful you don't open that zip up while it's under the machine. So I've just done a 4 thread, so that's 2 threads for the eye of the needle with a knot on the end of it. I'm going to go over that four times, knot it off, and just holds the teeth together. Then I'm going to rerun the zip onto it again, the zip runner onto it again. So I'm going to do here I'm also going to do another one at the right hand side of the actual cover flap. It's set in about a centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, maybe half an inch, doesn't matter. Just so as the zip pull can't run in behind this cover and get lost or even get opened. Okay, so I'm just going to put another knot in that thread. And I'm not worrying about it looking a bit Bushman in its finish. I'm not worried about that. It's purely a tack, which is never going to be seen. It's going to be covered both sides, so that your hand sewing skills, it does not matter. I mean, sure, someone would put a staple in there. I mean, so that would work as well, I'm sure. But what we want to do is just keep this closed. We want to keep from here down to that centre back closed, so it doesn't open up, and it makes the back sit a little bit more flat when this zip cover flap is put into position and top stitch closed. Right, so that's there. Now we need to go back and put our runner back on our fork, and we want to, okay, see the inside? That's going to be covered by the lining. So, that's what we've got. Now, we go back here. Position it so as even as possible. Good job you saw it the first time. Now, see that I've got a step on one side, the step on the other side has to match, otherwise when you zip this up, you will get a loop. And this is what we want. That is perfect. When that is cut, that cover sits down and gets stitched, it'll be perfect. I want to do exactly the same thing on the other side now. Now we've got the zip runner on. Right, so that's where that's going to go now. It's going to cover that, and you're not going to see any of your beautiful handwork. There'll be no tutting from anybody going, oh, isn't that awful? Because they can't see it. They won't be able to see it from the outside. They won't be able to see it from the inside. Okay, so that's where that's going. My biggest thing with this was I think I should have drawn a line to actually follow the edge of this fold there so as it looked even, because I pinned and unpinned and pinned and unpinned so many times because I didn't think it looked even. But in the end it was, but I think I made a real dog's breakfast out of it. I think I even unpinned it again from there. So when it lays flat, it just seems to look too much at one end. But it's actually not. Look, there we are. Again, I've moved it down just again. I think I should have drawn a line with a ruler up from the folded edge of the zip and then just follow that line. We're just going to edge stitch this with our sewing machine. Make sure those seams are pushed up and you don't catch those in your stitching. That's very important. There, okay, so you can see that's been edge stitched. And the box is now complete, it's just waiting for its lining. Right, this piece here, before we put our lining on, we wanted to attach that to our seam allowance at the back. Okay, we want to just, with our sewing machine, attach that to the seam allowance at the back. Okay, there we go. See, it's been attached. Fold your zip down so as it's facing towards the base, so that seam is up and free. There we have our lining. Make sure you know where the front pockets are, so it's back seam on back seam, front pockets to the front panel. Squidge it up and shove it inside the lining with the lid down. And we're going to be pinning seam on seam and stitching around that top edge. I can't tell you actually how excited I was to actually see this turned out for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, I've made so many projects, but this one just seemed to really appeal to me. Now, because we took the 1.5 or the 5/8 seam allowances on the lining is quite tight. Okay, it feels tight, it even looks tight here, but that's what you want. You don't want it to be too fluid inside this the cavity once everything is together. Make sure it's seam on seam here first before you start distributing your ease around our seams. Curves on curves never help because it's the sort of like the tin and tin situation where you've got a small tin and a large tin. They're never going to fit because they're different lengths, but once it's turned through, the lining will look like it's more than long enough because that inside edge will be smaller. That zip, just get rid of those threads. Cut those off, they annoy me. It's the only thing about using sort of linen-y type fabrics. We're going to move that runner with our finger when we come to stitch that seam. Now, because I'm normally used to having clips, quilt clips around the edge there, I was the human pin cushion doing this last seam. It just, I got pins in my hands everywhere. So again, zip foot. So loving this zip foot. Take your time, follow that row of stitching. Almost there. Because this is a very important seam at the top, now quite often I will go around this a second time just to even up my stitching for no other reason than it is an important seam, and it's the main, what I'd call the main wear seam. So I often think that my first round is about getting everything in place, positioned and held, and my second row of stitching is about the accuracy. Now I can actually push the foot up against the seam. I'm watching where I'm finishing, getting rid of any of the little niggles that you see as far as bumps go. The pins, so I ran off. The pins are not now sticking in my hands. I'm free to actually push the work through the machine. Right, we are done. Not too badly. So, crunch up your work and pull it through the base. So what I'm doing here, I've turned my work through and I'm actually grabbing my base seam of my project. And so it's the long seams, and that same seam on my lining, and we're going to stitch them together so it holds the lining down into the box or the bag. So it's easy, so it doesn't come out when you're using the bag. Probably should do this on more projects. It's called anchoring or anchor tacking. So I'm going to do an anchor tack on both sides through all layers there. So it's just the seam allowance on the seam allowance. They're all pointing in the same direction. And we'll sew that together with a long stitch. Okay, just on our stitching line. Done it on both sides. And before we turn it through, we need to pin those together and sew the seam together. So I haven't done the ends, I've just done the long seams for as long as I feel comfortable to sew. So it could be like 8 centimetres either side, 8 centimetres or 3 inches either side of the centre seam, or that notch. It's just anchoring those base seams together. When the project's turned through to the right side, they're all going to be pushed in the same direction anyway. They're just attached so as it keeps the lining inside the project. Let's just edge stitch that close, and there, so we edge stitch that closed. Let's get rid of any little threads. Okay, you can already see how lovely and taut the lining is. It's like it's quite form-fitted, and that's just a matter of just taking 5/8 seams, push it through to the right side. We're going to press that top edge. Oh, how exciting. Big shots of steam, get it all into place. You can put other sorts of pockets in here. You could put a pocket in the lid if you wanted to. I mean, it's up to you. This is the base project now for you to actually have a play with. Make it your own. You'll make one, but I think you'll make more than one. The little 5x7 one is actually a very cute little project too. Actually, it's a little darling project. So let's just zip this one up, and we have a beauty bag. So much fun.
Well folks, I hope you enjoyed Martyn's thorough tutorial on our latest bag technique sew along, the beauty bag. If you like the look of this design and would like to make one for yourself, I have a few things for you to do right now. First, head over to our website at swpea.com and grab the design today. Next, if you haven't already, join our Bag Technique Sew Along group on Facebook. There you'll find a like-minded community of bag makers all working on a common goal to create beautiful in-the-hoop bags. We share useful insights along the way to help you on track while you're completing your bag. We also run competitions as well, and all you have to do to enter is post a photo of your completed bag project. Well folks, I'm James Nash, and I hope to see you next time on the Sweet Pea YouTube channel.